Hello everyone, it's Mr. Wolfe, and in this video I'm going to be introducing our new unit on evolution. So this is one of my favorite units of the whole year, and I actually think it's the most important unit. All right? There's no other unit, no other topic in biology more important than evolution. All right? And that's because, this evolutionary biologist from the 1800s, Theodosius Dobzhansky, I think that's how you pronounce it, said that nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. This is one of my favorite scientific quotes. All right. Now, before we dive into this video, which is going over part 3, make sure that you should have already completed this beforehand, but make sure that you complete part 1, this pre-assessment, before watching this video. I really want you to just bring in what knowledge you already have. I'm sure you guys know actually a decent amount going into this class before we start to cover these topics in our unit. Same thing with part 2, and this is even more important because I'm going to be talking about the peppered moths in this video, and you're not going to be able to follow along as well as if you didn't complete the simulation. So pause the video if you haven't done this, click on the simulation, the link's on Canvas, make sure to set the forest to a light forest, and then just record some of the data you get right here. It's a really fast simulation. I think it does a really good job at modeling and having you experience the phenomena yourself. All right, so let's get into the actual terms and model of how evolution goes down. So let's just start off. We're talking about evolution. What is it? All right, it's how populations of species change over time. It's a pretty simple definition. All right, and notice that all you need to do in the future, I'll have a few other extra things. It's only the stuff in blue that you need to write down in the boxes. Feel free to write more, but it's the blue that I care about the most. All right, so it's a simple definition, but there are some really important parts. All right, one being that it's populations of species that change over time, not individuals. All right, where this isn't Pokemon, all right, where one individual can evolve. All right, technically it's grow and develop is the scientific biological term. Individuals grow and develop. It's populations that evolve over generations, not just within one. All right. So here's an example of a population. This is actually true. There was a population of elephants in Africa in 1930 that almost every single elephant in the population had tusks. Right? And that same population now, very few have tusks. So this population has evolved. All right? It has changed over time. And that's all evolution is. All right? And now we could ask other questions of like, well, why did this happen? And we'll get to those mechanisms. Right? So speaking of populations, all right, this is a population, all right, of humans. Specifically, it's the distribution of human height in a high school class. So here are the amount of individuals that are 5 feet tall, and here's 5'6" and 6 foot and 6'5" over here. Now, the males are in black shirts and the females are in white shirts. So we could kind of focus on the females if we wanted to, or the males, or we could look at the whole population all together. And what we kind of start to see is this, it almost looks like a bell curve. And it literally is, that's what mathematicians call this, is a bell curve, because it looks like a bell. And what it shows is variation. Right? There's just a range of traits or genes that exist in all populations. In this case, we're looking at that phenotype for those genes for human height. Right? But it turns out whatever the trait is, it could be skin color, height, strength, intelligence, whatever the trait is, there's always variation that presents itself, right, in a similar to the bell curve that we see here. Right? It may be skewed a little bit more to the right or skewed a little bit more to the left, but we always see this distribution of variation. There's always some differences in any trait in a population. All right. So that's going to help set our foundation later. Now, some other terms that are going to be important for us is this concept of a selective pressure. What's a selective pressure? It's an environmental pressure that will prevent some organisms from reproducing. Right? It could cause them maybe to die before they could reproduce, or maybe they just can't find a mate. Right? So here's some specific examples. Maybe there's just there's a limited amount of available food, or there's predators trying to kill these organisms before they can reproduce, or maybe there's harsh environmental conditions that cause them to die before they reproduce, or maybe for the inability to find a mate, maybe there's competition with other males, or maybe the females are just really, really choosy. And I'm saying females are choosy and males are competitive because in the biological world, these are usually the roles that we see from these different sexes. All right. So our next term is going to be a species. Right? And usually you talk about species, it's like different types of organisms, right? Correct. But what happens if you have organisms like that are just very similar? How do you know that they're the same? They're different, but they're similar. How do we know that they're the same species or different species? So our definition is it's a group of organisms that could reproduce with one another to create fertile offspring. So let's look at a specific example. Are horses and donkeys the same species, right? They're similar, all right, but they're also pretty different. Right? So if we a horse and a donkey, they can mate, right, and they'll actually produce offspring, right, which is a mule. Now, are they the same species? No. Right? Now that seems to kind of go against this definition. They were able to reproduce, right? But they need to be able to produce and create fertile offspring. So it turns out that horses and donkeys can mate and produce offspring, a mule. However, a mule is not fertile. Right? It cannot make other mules or other horses or donkeys. It won't be able to pass its genes on to the next generation. So horses and donkeys, even though they're closely related, even though they're very similar, they are not the same species based on our definition. All right. So with those terms in mind, let's talk about how natural selection occurs. All right. And we're going to tie in not all, but most of the terms we've just talked about. So this is how evolution happens, or one of those. That's the main mechanism that drives evolution. So first, for natural selection, variation exists in the population. So I've modeled that right here for our peppered moths example that you guys did in the simulation, right? We had about 50% black moths, 50% white moths. Right? Now, there's also going to be some type of selective pressure that causes some traits to be beneficial for survival and other traits that are not beneficial for survival. So in this case, our selective pressure is the birds. It's our predators. Right? And with the light forest, with the kind of lighter white background on the trees, right, the black moths really stick out. So those birds are going to pick them off, and they're not going to be able to survive. Now, some white moths are going to get picked off too, but it's probably going to be the black moths that are going to be able to be most easily seen and eaten the most. All right. So, all right, the organisms that do survive are able to reproduce. Right? So in this case, I have my white moths that survived, some black moths that survived, and I'm going to still have the same number in that I had originally in my population, because organisms always produce more offspring in general. So here I had 4 that survived. So here I have 7 white moths being reproduced, and then 2 survived. So I had about 3 moths that reproduced. It's just kind of a guesstimate. All right, so that's my second generation. Now, the same selective pressure is going to be there for this generation, right? And birds are going to be able to easily see the black moths. They can still take out some white, but they're going to most easily see the black moths, and they're not going to survive. And if that's the case, then they're not going to be able to pass down their genes, their traits, to the next generation. So you'll notice that now it's only the white moths that have survived. So the gene for the white colored wings are going to be the only trait that gets passed down. And so you'll notice that we see evolution. Our population has changed over time. All right. It was caused by this concept of natural selection, where variation exists in the population, and a selective pressure causes some organisms to be able to pass down their traits to the next generation, and others will not be able to. All right. So there's a foundation. Now we're going to go to part 4. Part 4 gives you a specific example of natural selection. And this is a really important video, because we're actually going to continue with this story the next time we meet in class via Zoom. So the Rocket Pocket Mouse video, I think it's almost 10 minutes long, but you only need to watch to 7 minutes and 54 seconds. All right, and as you watch the video, answer the questions in this part of your packet. Okay. The video is right here. It's also linked to Canvas as well. All right, the last thing that I'll have you guys do is to watch this Brain Pop. It's a short, about 4-minute video, but it really, really hits on an important concept, this debate between 2 evolutionary biologists at the time, Darwin and this other scientist named Lamarck. And so this really hits on some really important misconceptions about evolution, to make sure that we are all on the same page on that. All right. Well, thank you all for watching. All right. Good luck completing the rest of your tasks, and I will see you all soon.